All right, welcome back to the Reality Show Life Coach podcast. Today we are talking about season 45, episode 11 of Survivor. And with me today, I have special guest Kari Langkamp. Kari, nice to see you. Introduce
Hello.
yourself.
Yes, welcome. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I am a master certified life coach. I work currently as a contract instructor at the Life Coach School, helping new students get certified. And I also write out of my master coach training project came a column that I write every 2 weeks in a Wisconsin newspaper. It's like a little bit of a Dear Abby kind of column, but with a coaching bent. So answering questions in a written kind of format that way. And yeah, that's largely what I do: coach and teach coaching, and write about coaching, and watch Survivor every Wednesday with my family.
Yeah.
So, who are not all like my son is off at college, so like we still, text in and chime in with our take on what happened each week. So,
I
yeah.
love it. Okay, well, as a fellow Wisconsinite, I have to know which newspaper is it so I can
It is
send
way
family
up
my way.
north. Yeah, it's way up north, the Intercounty Leader. So my challenge for my master coach training project was assigned to me to get 100 no's from editors and publishers on anything related to coaching. And I decided to spin that into a regular column and sent out all kinds of requests and got a yes as well. And that is where I've ended up. So I've just spent the last year just kind of like getting into that rhythm and then potentially taking that on the road to other places. We'll see how that goes.
I
But
am
yeah,
so
it's been kind of
impressed by
fun.
that. I think
So
that's awesome. How many no's
yeah.
did you actually end up getting?
A lot of non-responses, but I
Mm.
think I had more than 30 no's. I mean, I have a spreadsheet of hundreds more newspapers I could reach out to. So when I get to that point, I'll go back to them and hit them up again. But yeah, I sent out lots of messages, lots of requests, played with fun taglines and messages like, please say no to this in my subject line. It's like, maybe they'll read this if it's weird. So some did, some didn't. All good. So
That's
yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
How did your family get into Survivor?
Yeah, well, my brother was, and my mom have been like from the get go. They watched every week, and I think my husband actually went to high school with one of the women on the first season, so we watched early on, and then we kind of, kids were small, lost a little bit of track. But Wednesday nights tended to be family night. My husband
Mm.
works for a school; he's at events almost every night of the week, especially during the winter when Survivor is running.
Yeah.
And so family night was Wednesday, and that kind of turned into our family tradition. My son is much better about remembering this happened on this season and this happened on that season. I think I blame it on parenting while I'm while I've been watching, but it's just kind of something we do. So and my husband's job, like one of the ladies he knows from there runs a pool, so we're assigned each season. I think I had Jay Maya this season and he
Mm.
was assigned Brando. Neither one of us won, obviously, at this point. But he has had in the past, I think, maybe a winner in there or at least someone in the final three. So yeah, just
I love
keeps
it.
it interesting. So yeah.
No, I love it. And yeah, no, we've definitely gotten family members together for Survivor because everybody's like, Psh, reality TV. And we're like, no, this is really good. And it keeps getting better and better every year. So we're working on getting our RV neighbors. We have some we travel full time. We have some neighbors right
Sure.
now. We've been like, oh, just come over and hang out and watch it. And so they're like, what is this? So we'll see if they get hooked.
Yeah.
Well, we're getting so close to the end. And I mean, how many people do we have left at this point? Like seven? It's like six or seven.
I think is it six for next week? Did we
Maybe it's
there were
six for
seven
next
this week?
week.
Yeah. And now I can't remember. I can picture them in this
I know.
episode. Yeah. But yes, we're down
Yeah.
to the
So
wire.
down to the
Yeah.
wire, they've been starting out each episode doing a recap of the previous one. So I didn't know if Emily was going to take credit for that move with Bruce, how she got Bruce out, and she did, which has mixed results for her actually
Yeah.
admitting that. So there's a lot because of the longer episodes. We see a lot of things around camp. I'm sure we'll talk about some of those today. But the other big events that happen, this boat shows up and they draw rocks to see who goes. And Emily Who Goes Again, which is again mixed,
Yeah,
results
she
for
didn't really
her.
seem like she wanted to go.
No.
Like, and Jake really had his heart set on it, I think. But yeah,
Yeah, I noticed that too. I was like, oh, it's like both amazing and terrible because it's like there's no winning at that, right? Even if you
right.
get an advantage, target on your back. If you don't get an advantage, target on your
Target on
back.
your back.
So all the way.
Yeah.
And then of course she returns, and then they go to the reward and immunity challenge. Drew wins, and he wins reward, and he takes Austin and Drew for Guys Night 2.0, which I was sad they didn't do another montage here like they
Right.
did last week with Top Gun.
With all the, yeah, audio overlaid. Yeah.
Yeah. And then at Tribal, they try to blindside Julie, but of course, Dee tells Julie to play her idol, and she does. And Julie single handedly sends Emily home.
Hmm.
What did you think of
Yeah.
this episode?
Yeah. Yeah. Lots of thoughts. I think it's fascinating to me. After the first episode, I think my son watched it before us and he
Mm.
messaged, like, oh, already know who the most annoying player in the game is. And it was Emily because of her comments right off the bat. But then as the
Yeah.
season has progressed, I'm, like, rooting for her. Like, I think it's that whole hero's journey, the transformation, right? She has, like, taken feedback and
Mm.
really thought through how she wants to approach this game. Even just her response to, like, oh, I don't know if I really want to be on this boat. And but as you kind of alluded to when you gave the recap, I think her eagerness to share and take credit for that move with
Mm.
Bruce was like, ooh, that put as much of a target on her back as going on the boat did. I feel like
It's
she
true.
may still have gone anyway. I don't know. She wasn't, I don't know that she had the numbers she thought she did or not. I'm not sure. But
No, I'm not sure either. And I mean, like, did you get a sense that Julie was thinking about voting Emily before? Yeah,
yeah.
so
Yeah.
it may not have mattered.
Yeah, I feel like Julie and Katura both, like, have had their person that they have been,
Hmm.
like, and now that we get to see Katura without Bruce there, maybe we get to see a different side of her. But yeah, Julie has been very focused. If someone wrongs her, like, she is very focused on getting them out. So
Yeah.
yeah, it
And
may have
I
not
wondered,
mattered.
it may not have mattered. And I also wonder the
Yeah.
extent to which the rest of the tribe is seeing the side of Julie that we get to see in her little interviews
Hmm.
that she's been doing. She's
Yes.
fierce.
Yes, yeah, she comes off as this, like, caring mom, I think, to them, and, all the way along, it has felt a little like, "What are they how are they not seeing this?" But, of course, they're not seeing those interviews that we are. So, yeah, it's hard to say. A good
Well, and it's
actress,
I
maybe.
maybe we're seeing the like hidden attorney side of Julie because I don't think she's shared that what her actual
Yeah,
profession is. So maybe this is
yeah,
what she's like in court.
yeah, yeah, it could be. It's interesting that both of the female attorneys have chosen to hide that aspect of their life. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and stuck to
Yeah.
it. So, yeah.
Yeah, at this far into it, I wondered if they were going to reveal it in an act of like shared vulnerability or whatever, or like you're in my inner circle now, but so far, no.
No, no, and like that was even just the Katura sharing very, very vulnerably
Mm.
her backstory in this. I was sort of waiting, like, oh, is this going to mean she's going to share a little bit more? But no, she stuck to it. It seemed very intentional. Um, and clearly she needed to feel safe in order to share that in
Yeah.
this setting.
Well, do we want
So
to talk
yeah.
more about that moment first? Like Katura sharing her background with them on day 20. Like she waited
Yeah.
so long.
Yeah.
Um, what
Yes, I
did you
was
think?
re-listening to your one of the previous episodes with Christina, and she was talking a little bit about Katura's, like, anti-Bruce. Like, everything has been about
Mhm.
getting Bruce. So it almost feels like, oh, like there's this weight lifted for her. Like, I don't have him to deal with, and now I can play my game. It's like she has this a little bit of permission now to figure out how she wants to intentionally use her story,
Yeah.
and kind of write her survivor story from here. But it's just interesting that it took him not being there to,
Oh, that's interesting.
like,
I didn't put
yeah.
two and two together.
Yeah, and
in
I
that
could just be
way.
totally reading into it, right? Like the timing might just be like, this is the time that I need to do this. I don't know. Um, but it just seemed like it was interesting that it's now that he's gone. Now that
No,
can
and
come
you're
out.
absolutely right because the other, I feel like, time when she was vulnerable with people, it was when they were at the sanctuary and they were just doing ladies' night. And she did, share what was in her letters. She could have just been like, this is private. I don't want to share this, but she
Mhm.
was willing to share it. But you're right. Bruce wasn't there either. So
Yeah. Yeah.
oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, and since
Um,
we only get those snippets, it's so hard to tell, like, what else is happening behind the scenes that we don't know impacting that decision. But it seems, at
yeah.
least with her, it seems very intentional. Like she's not just, oh yeah, I'm going to tell my story today. Like she's thought it through. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Why do you think she picked now to share her story?
it seemed to me. I mean, I guess my guess is just right. Like now he's gone, and here we are. I need to build some, like, who is her alliance really?
Mm.
I don't know that she
Oh.
has a strong, like, alliance connection, and she hasn't really, like, she's kind of worked with some people, but then kind of worked with other people.
Mm.
It has really been just get Bruce out. So,
That's her
um
strategy. That is true. Well, and it's interesting because even you do see the interaction that she had with Jake, where she was like, "Yeah, we
Mhm,
could work together for a couple plays." Like very
mhm.
like, "I'm not going to promise you anything. We have
Yeah,
just now, and we'll see what happens later." So I don't necessarily see that changing with this, but it was interesting. You're right. Like the timing of this, Bruce is gone. She shares this incredibly vulnerable story, but
yeah,
yet still holds back. I was waiting for her to be like, and also I was holding this back, but I'm also an attorney.
yeah,
Es
yeah, I was
especially
waiting for
after
the same
Jake
thing too.
and then J because Jake says, like, "I see, like, attributes of people I work with, very
Yeah,
similar to you, Katura."
yeah,
And
that
she's
he
like,
could
"Oh."
honor that in her without her even sharing that. Yeah, yeah,
And I loved when she said too of like, "This is my like, this isn't like a sad story. This is," did she say redemption story? Is that what
I
the
think,
word?
yeah, I'm trying to remember if I jotted that down or not, but yeah, it was powerful.
Yeah. What do you make of that from like a coaching perspective?
Well, it feels again, right, like that whole, her, it's an interesting thing to think about. She has overcome all of that already in her life, and how that might shape her
Mm,
approach to being on the island, right? Like I don't think most of us can even fathom being pulled out of school at 5th grade, ending up in a cult, being told to be married, having to run
right.
away, having to come back into, like, I mean, it's just beyond what many of us could even imagine.
Mhm.
And yet she's clearly persevered. She did, I think, call it a redemption story and say that she's living her
Yeah.
dream, right? So
Yeah.
whether or not she wins, it sounds like there's like an acceptance of, like, I've already created this thing, this life that I wanted for myself. So this might just be icing on the cake, or
Mhm.
proving to herself she can do it again. So it's fascinating. Right. It's just like anything in life when someone is choosing to be vulnerable with you, like, oh wow, I'm so much more interested in her character now and her role
Yes.
in this, like, oh, so interesting. And it's that, like, willing to share that, and be vulnerable allows people to be drawn in. So
Yeah.
I don't know if I answered your
100.
question, but
You did
so
well, I yeah. Well, and I think too, it's like, oh, that intentional choice to share because now Jake and Julie know
Mhm.
more about her, feel probably closer to her. Like, how could you not feel closer to her? But then it's
Right,
again the double-edged sword of, well, wait a minute. If Katura gets to the end, does this story now put her in a different light for other people if they find
right,
out about like, and knowing what they know, it's like how do they use that information, but also feeling so bonded to her, like that's not my story to share to other, like it's
right.
so complicated because the human side, I mean, I think last was it last week where we see Julie just being like, oh, I'm so devastated to have to
Yeah.
like vote out these basically family members at this point. And now Kurtura has probably become more of a family member to her now that
Right.
she knows more about her. Um,
Yeah.
what do you do with that? Like, oh, like how hard
Yeah.
that is for them to be in.
And that feels like kind of the theme of this entire episode in some ways, right? Like watching Austin battle kind of that internal, like he was so guarded in how like,
Mhm.
oh, I have to tell Dee, like these emotional connections that they've made coming right up against the gameplay. And how do I approach this and tell this person something that could demolish my game potentially, right?
Yeah.
Or at
Yeah.
least significantly alter it, or alter the alliance that I have. And um, all of those like tight emotional connections they've made that feel like they're outside of the game, but are still happening in the
Mhm.
context of this game. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And you,
Well,
yeah,
and with Austin and Dee too, and like I wonder to what extent it was them actually talking about having a future because they reference Rob and
right,
Amber, who of course have gotten married and have 4 kids after having
right,
their own showmance. And so now they're not just talking about short-term future, "Ooh, we could win $1 million." They're like, oh, there is suddenly the possibility of a long-term future here. And if Dee is my future partner in life,
right. Like, does this
do
negate that possibility if I don't tell her? Right.
right, what's more
Yeah.
important? What's more
Yeah.
important? And it's like, I think you had put into the notes like define loyal because we see obviously Austin and Dee addressing this in 2 very different ways.
Right. Right.
Because Austin tells Dee, which leads to what it leads to. But then Dee's loyalty is to
Yeah.
Austin, but also to Julie.
Yeah, it was interesting as I think my son, as we kind of texted back and forth, like it's so fascinating that she felt compelled to tell Julie, but in doing so, clearly stated that Austin is her number one.
Right.
And so, like, ooh, Julie, you had an opportunity. Like, she just told you, yes, I'm being loyal, and he's more important. Like, he's her number one. So it's just interesting that
Yeah.
that Julie chose to go for Emily then, when, like, well, we could have she could have blindsided anyone she wanted,
Anybody. Anybody.
anyone, except for Drew, obviously. But
Right.
yeah, yeah,
Um, I was actually kind of interested she didn't go after Austin. I was like, was this a decision to be fair to Dee? Because, hey, you gave me this valuable information.
right.
Now I'm here for another week. Thank you very much. Um, but I'm not going to do this thing that then makes you put more of a target back on me.
Yeah.
Because if she had gotten rid of Austin, I'm pretty sure Dee would then be like, you know what,
Oh,
Julie,
yeah. Farewell.
see ya.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a fine
Um,
line. And like, when do you make those choices? And yet you don't always get the opportunity. So here's an opportunity. Is it the right time?
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's such a tough decision because this does still keep the Reba four in quotes together,
Right.
but not really.
Yeah. Yeah. Based on the previews, it looks like definitely not really is coming.
No.
We'll find out
Um,
next week. Yeah.
why do you think Dee voted for Julie? Because she said when she was talking to Julie, you and me will put it on Emily.
At one point, I thought she said something too, though, about I'll vote for you. Like it felt like they had
Oh,
agreed
maybe
on
she
that.
did.
Like there was just like a quick moment, and I may have not understood it correctly, but I got the sense like, oh, I'm going to make it look like I'm with the
With
group.
everybody.
Yeah. Um, to somehow, I mean, essentially to me, that says Dee's trying to protect herself. To if we're Julie, we might need to assess that. And like,
You're
is this a
right.
good thing? Is this not a good thing? What does this really mean? But I could be wrong.
Yeah. And I mean, I can't wait to see Austin's response because it's like, is Austin going to do the math and say, hey, maybe it was Dee that told Julie? Because everybody was telling me, don't tell Dee. Dee's going to have to be blindsided here too. And he's like, I absolutely cannot do that.
Yeah. Yeah. At some point, I'm always fascinated too, like when they go back and watch this or when they've chatted about like what is it like to go back and see like, oh, they had information. That's who did it, right? Like when did they figure all that out? We'll find out, I
Well,
guess,
and
some
what
of
does
it,
it
but
do? How does it impact your current relationship with that person, knowing
exactly.
what you know now, what they said? I'm like, no way, shape, or form do I think Bruce and Katura have any sort of like friendship or anything now. I would be shocked to be wrong about that,
Yeah,
um, but it's like Dee and Austin. Like, what does this do for them? Because there's got to
right.
be a part of you after the fact that's just like, can I really trust this person
Yeah. Yeah, and
if they
trust
would
is
be
such
willing?
a fragile, like in the game, out of the game, right? It doesn't like it doesn't really matter where you're at. Obviously, everything is just heightened in the midst of
Mm,
that game, but certainly will impact everything outside of it too.
I
So
have to imagine. Yeah, and I like in this in watching back to Indies, like I'm gonna continue playing with my heart, but that means so many different things. It could have been like my heart tells me that I value my relationship with Austin, so sorry, Julie.
yeah,
Please
yeah.
forgive me, but it
And it
didn't.
could mean something different this week, or I mean, they're day to day, not week to week, as we're watching it. But
Right.
right,
Oh, that's
the
true. Yeah.
hearts that day on day whatever could be totally different than playing with your heart on the next day, completely
Yeah.
depending on what happens and how they're perceiving it. So, yeah, and the information
And
they
I was
have.
yeah. Well, and I was completely bummed that it then led to Emily being voted out. Like she
Yeah,
was definitely one of my favorites. For the same reasons you were mentioning. I mean, she's just such a coachable human. Like she took information, somebody held up a mirror to essentially and just said, "You're very aggressive, what do you want to
yeah,
do with this information? Because it's going to ultimately get you voted off." And she's just been like so open and vulnerable after that in a way where, you know, completely seemed out of her character. And so
yeah,
out of everybody
yeah.
on the show, I've just been like rooting for her to win. And I was like, oh, what a story. They're building us up to it. And now it's like,
Finished. Yeah, I felt the same way. She even as she talked about I think it might have been when she was on the journey, faced with the challenge. I can't remember exactly where she brought it up, but saying like this debate she was having between being aggressive and playing
mm,
soft. And the fact that rather than just choosing a playing style, that she was being thoughtful about it
mm,
and trying to figure out what makes sense now. What are my reasons for approaching it this way? And fascinating that she chose to just be honest. Um, I don't know if there's a win in the setting she was in, like you said. It's hard to say. It may just be a wash, no matter what you choose to tell them or whatever happens. Um,
totally.
yeah,
What did you think about her decision not to go for the challenge? If she won that challenge, she was going to be safe at tribal,
yeah.
and she
It
decided
felt
not to.
like it's interesting. Like for me, it had this moment of like, oh yeah, I've been there, right? Where I tried something hard and it didn't go well the first time. Like she had the challenge, that
Mm,
other puzzle where you could see her getting visibly stressed out as she was trying to finish that puzzle and it didn't happen and she didn't figure it out. So it's totally human, right? And
hmm
normal that our brain would be like, ooh, this is a really bad idea. I'm going to get nervous, right? Like to be able to set yourself up in that short span of time that she had to decide I'm going to figure this out would take a lot of self thought or self coaching in my part, at
Yeah.
least if I'd had that happen previously on something like that. So yeah.
No, I totally agree with that. When they said that like nobody's ever gotten this challenge,
Hmm.
also you're going to lose your vote. Also, like the stakes are super high for her. I was just like, you know what? Anybody who's not in the right mental space for this is going to
Exactly.
lose. Like you don't have, I really do think it's a situation where if you can like keep your head and just like have like
Yeah.
believe in yourself, essentially, I can do
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
Which is
And
what
it
we saw
has to be
Austin
that
do.
with like 100% belief, like I will figure this out in the time it takes. And if it's not that, yeah, it's probably not worth doing it because
No.
any that doubt is going to come through in that span of time when you flip the timer.
Right,
So,
because your brain just is like,
yeah,
blah. It doesn't, you don't have
yeah,
access to those resources.
yeah,
I was thinking about this too, because they do show I think it was Jake and Katura like practicing flint with the flint and making fire. I was like, how much of this is believing you can do it, make fire, and how much of this
mhm,
is actual skill?
yeah.
What do you
It's
think?
Yeah, it's a good I mean, it seems like at some point, if they've been doing we don't know, like, how often they're practicing, right? Since they don't show us that all the time. But yeah, if you've practiced it plenty of times, yeah, then I think the belief part probably does play in, and you need to believe that you'll get there somehow in order to keep practicing it too.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't as the daughter of a coach who actually like an athletics coach, he was just talking to me about having worked with some young athletes, and it's like it's great to have practice, but if you're practicing the wrong things, you're practicing skills that aren't going to help you get there either, right? So it is this combination of like practicing the right skills with the right mindset. Like if we're practicing and we're not actually making a fire the way that is most efficient to do it, it's probably not helping. So,
Oh,
I
that's
do
such
I
a
know
good
what that
point
is?
too. Right.
I have
Well,
not been out practicing with my flint, so I can't speak to that, but yeah.
well, I think that's what speaks to like the power of like having a good coach or having a coach or somebody with a different
Yeah.
perspective on it. I had a client yesterday who was just like, we were talking about something. She's like, how did you know to ask that question? Like, what's the framework? Like, as
Yeah.
if there is a formula that's like, if I just follow these
Right.
steps, then I can have my own
Right.
perspective. And I was like, huh, I don't know. I was like, it just seemed like it wasn't working over there. So why don't we shift perspective? And she's like, but how did you know to ask that specific question? And I was like, it's
Yeah.
just have a different human, different perspective. It's like if you're so much in your own weeds, in the weeds of your own
Right.
problem, you don't get to have that. And so that could come up with Flint. It could come up, any of these conversations that they're having. It's hard to take a step back and
Yeah.
see what's happening. Like Emily
Yeah.
wouldn't have been able to see her own aggressive side if I think was it Caleb who pointed it out to
Yeah.
her.
Yep.
Yeah, if Caleb hadn't said like, "Hey, can I share with you our experience of you?" Oh,
Yeah.
she would have just thought she
And
should
her
be more
willingness to
aggressive.
say yes,
Yeah.
right? Like it's this two pieces of like so I mean that was one of I think my favorite pieces of this season, right? Have someone say like, "Hey, can I share this?" And for her to be she could have just said like, "No, you're wrong."
Mm,
And to be willing to listen to it, take it in, how do I want to use this information? Like that is coaching, right? Like that's
yeah,
being willing to open up to the coaching and say, okay, what part of this is true? What part of it do I want to take from, and adjust from here? So yes,
totally.
also disappointed that she's no longer
I
in the
know.
season,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Well, and I
yeah,
wonder, like that happened very early on with Caleb and Emily. It's like if that had happened, if they were both there on day 20, would she have listened to him? I don't
right,
know, right? Because she might have a lot of evidence that being aggressive in the way that she had been aggressive was very like working for her. So
exactly,
it also is like sometimes we have those interventions in our life at the exact time where we can be open to hearing,
right,
you know?
yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what else stood out for you from this episode?
Um, let's see. I'm trying to think. We've kind of already talked a little bit about Austin and Dee and telling Julie and Katura. Just like tiny little aside, I have a soft spot for Jake.
Yeah.
I just feel like he has this, like he has stuck it out through all of these, like somehow he's still there, right? Like he just keeps
Hmm.
scraping by and finding his way there. And his accent is thoroughly entertaining. And I just loved, like, as they showed him on the beach with him talking about, like, I've been the tree,
Yeah.
and now I need to move into a supporting role. And in terms of coaching, that feels like, yeah, like when we realize, like, oh, I've been choosing to be a tree in the
Hmm.
show instead of choosing to be in a supporting role, or like, hey, what would a leading role look like in this story? How do I get there? Um, I just thought that was a fascinating metaphor for him to bring out and think about like, where is he at? How do you shift that in the context of this game and where
Yeah.
he's at right now with the story that he has? Um,
Oh, 100%.
Tricky.
I mean, it's so tricky. I mean, Jake is definitely a favorite around this household too. The accent for sure. Like when
Yes.
he says to Katura, like about the apple cart, she's like, "What? Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
apple
it's,
cart." He's
an
like, "Yeah,
apricot.
yeah, the apple cart." Um, well, and I think too is like, I don't know. It's like, do they actually get into any sort of comfort zone in here and the roles that they play? I don't know. I don't think
Right.
so. So it is like he does have the option to like change this role. How people will or will not be receptive to this,
Right.
like we'll see. I mean, Jake obviously needs to do something and he recognizes he needs to do
Yeah.
something. Um, and it's so hard because it's like, I'm sure he's got many different scenarios he's been playing out of like, I could do this, I could do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's
But you
also dependent on other people.
other people. And now
Yeah.
Emily's gone, and Emily was willing to play with Jake to a
Yeah.
certain extent. Now Emily's gone, so he basically only has Katura at this because
Yeah.
otherwise it's the Reba 4, but they're like in the process of like destroying that little unit. So I don't know about you, but I have this hunch that Jake might make it to the finals.
I feel like he will at least get close. I feel like as it gets closer though, somebody will realize like, "Oh, wait. This guy has scraped through and
Yeah.
fought his way through and through and through, and he's tried to make moves. He just hasn't convinced people to join him on all
Hmm.
of them. So who knows? Yeah, I think it's very likely that he could make his way there just as that, like you said, as that Reba dynamic appears to be shifting in the next episode.
Yeah.
Somebody's going to need him. Somebody's
Oh,
going to want
100%.
him. Yeah, suddenly.
Suddenly they'll
Yeah.
want him. I think it'll be Julie somehow. I think Julie is all like, nah, I'm
Yeah.
gonna forge ahead in this other way. I think you saw it a little bit when like Julie and Katura and Jake were sitting
Yes,
there,
on the
and she's like,
beach.
"Well, what about a different play, guys?" And they're like,
Yeah.
I think they're. Um, I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens. I don't know if Jake has done enough at this point, or if there's anything he can do in the remaining week there to convince people to give him $1 million. He would have to probably just change everything at this point, but who knows? It could get to
Yeah.
the point though where like, okay, out of the three, you're the one I don't dislike as much as the other two that are sitting next
Right.
to you.
Right.
Who
Yeah.
knows?
Yeah, and it's hard to say too. We were trying to gauge like it's entirely possible that they change the way this wraps up. I don't know.
Mm,
Like, will they have them go to fire again? Will they not? I just every season I'm like, is it going to be the same?
yeah.
Did they just take it down to two? Do they still have three? I don't know. Yeah, it'll be interesting
Who
to see
knows?
where that goes and how he's able to, if he's able to get there. Um, Yeah. I feel like
Yeah.
right now, like Katura, same thing. Like I don't I would guess that those Reba 4 see both of them as non-threats.
Hmm.
So save people to bring with them.
Little do
And
they know.
yeah, and very much seeing each other, like they're starting to hit like, okay, now we're threats to each other. And we'll see how that
We'll see.
unfolds. So
Well, you said a little bit
yeah,
back, who knows if they'll go to fire. What have you thought about all the changes they've made over the years? Because they had a formula that worked and now they keep changing it in this way
yes.
I find fascinating, but
Yeah, I think it's interesting to see like there's varying opinions in our household on this.
hmm,
Like some people who are like, they should stop changing it. I don't know that I'm solidly in that camp, or like, I think it's interesting to make small tweaks because it keeps the players on their toes. Like they don't know, is there another idol out there now that Bruce is like, I thought that was interesting. Here we know he left and we didn't see anyone looking for
mm,
anything. I know it's close to the end, but who knows? Um, and yeah, bringing back the auction was very fun and having
yeah,
the slight twist on that, those kind of things. But yeah, so I think it's all good, right? Like that's just life. Like things are going to keep changing and morphing. And yet it's nice to still have like the same spirit of the game there, and some tradition, right? I guess I'm somewhere in the middle. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I think I do love it. I like it when they have the things you're like, "Oh, that part," like the auction. I was like, "Oh,
yeah,
this is like the warm, cozy," like I remember different
long
seasons
ago.
of this happening. Um, it's almost though a good reminder of how like, you know, we ourselves can get stuck in a rut and we ourselves can stop switching up the game and just, we stop giving ourselves new things to chew on and play with and like um, I think that's what's been really fun about doing Survivor on the podcast this season is that reminder of, if you just keep switching things up and not being set in your ways, what happens in life? And it's both scary. There's uncertain things that come out of it, but then it's
Yeah,
also just like, oh, but this is so fun. I think I've liked that part of it. And I don't think it's necessarily influenced some of our trip planning for our RV training for
sure.
next year, but we're definitely doing things way outside our comfort zone for next year. And so I'm like, well, maybe. I'm like, maybe
Yeah,
we're more open to this idea. But I mean, Jeff has said in the past that like the reason there's not more older people on the show is because a lot of A, they don't apply, and B, a lot of the people they find are like kind of set in their ways in a way that doesn't make for an interesting
right,
story
right.
or character. So I think that's pretty telling.
Yeah, yeah. I think right. It is kind of like some of what we see in coaching too, right? It's being really intentional, and I'm sure they
Mm.
are. I'm sure they've got so much research and data they're working with,
Yeah.
and some creative side, right? Like if something is really working and it's creating the result you want to have, then figure out what parts of it you need to keep and what would be a good change. What are we willing to try to make it even better? And so as
Mm.
long as they're coming from that perspective, right,
Yeah.
they're
I
more
never
apt to
get
get.
the impression that they're like, our show is not enough. We've got to compete
Yeah,
with Amazing Race down the street. It's like, I always get the impression from Jeff, it's just like, ooh, but wouldn't this be fun? Or like the
yeah,
producers sitting around going, what if we did this? And then see how people react to it. Um, it makes for a
yeah.
very fresh show too, because nobody can prepare for half the stuff they are now giving them.
Yeah, I think was it I'm trying to think which season where one of the guys had done 3D models or 3D printing
Oh,
of the
yeah.
challenges, and
Yeah.
I can't why I don't can't remember his name for the life of me right now, but like that piece, it's like, yes, that's why they have to bring it. Like it's great to have like, oh, we've done this challenge so many times and that's fun. And it's always so fun to see like, let's tweak it, let's change it, let's make it a little more challenging,
Yes.
let's add a twist to it because that's what keeps it interesting
Very
and
much
and
so.
fun. Yeah.
And fun.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this. Would you or any, I guess, members of your family apply to be on Survivor?
I am like not a big fan of swimming. So every time they're in the water, I'm like, oh, there's a reason I couldn't do this. Or it would take a lot of like, I would really need to want to do it. I
Yeah.
think both my brother and my son, I think, have considered it at times. I don't know if my son ever would or not. I think he might have more fun than he realizes. I
Oh,
think, like, as a coach, right, as we watch, it's like always so fascinating to see like people willing to put themselves in a situation where they know that no matter what happens, they're going to leave on the other side a changed person,
yeah.
right? We don't know what
Yeah.
that change will be. We don't know like what it will look like, but it takes guts and like, right? You have to be willing to endure some stuff of all
Right.
kinds, right? To go there. So, yeah.
Yeah. And it's not just like an outward bound trip where you're like, oh, out in nature, whatever. I'm
Right.
like, okay, you're out in nature and also in a very public stage. Like, it's like there's
Right.
multiple stages to the growth. There's the experience and the
Yeah.
experiment itself. And then, then you have the long wait before it airs and what do the relationships with your fellow cast members look like with that, and then the airing of it. And now everybody in the world who watches Survivor is now in on it and has a lot of opinions,
Right.
might message you. Some of those messages might be nice, but they probably half of them are not nice.
Exactly. I'm sure
And
it's
then
at least
what?
50-50. Yeah. Yeah.
It's gotta
Yeah.
be. And like if you're more of a villain, then you might get, I mean, I hate to say death threats, but you might get it. And it's like, okay, then how do
Yeah.
you manage that side of things? So,
Yeah.
I mean, kudos to anybody that does this. And especially too, it's like, we talked about Katura this episode of like sharing what she shared,
Hmm.
knowing she knows now everybody in the world who watches Survivor knows her story.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not just
And then
being
what?
vulnerable with your castmates.
Right.
It is literally being vulnerable with anyone who might watch this. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. There's no way, shape, or form in which you go on a show like this and you're like, yeah, I'm the same person. I'm fine.
Right.
Nothing changed.
Right. Like I just don't think that's probably possible. So
No, not at
yeah.
all.
Yeah.
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 Well,
Even
any
in
other
just the
thought?
one
Yeah.
days, right? Like, yeah. Like if you're
They change day
Bruce,
by
even
day.
right. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, well, any last thoughts before we wrap up for today?
I don't think so. It's been so fun to chat Survivor with you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And I'm eager to
Likewise.
see what happens in the rest of this season. So,
Well, I have
yeah.
to ask, who's your pick to win?
That is a tough call at this point. I feel like it could go a number of ways. I feel like if Julie gets there, she has a good shot. I also feel like I don't know. It's probably one of those Reba 4, but I'm still rooting for Jake. and and I would be rooting for Katura if she can get there too. Like I think if she can make some of those connections, right? Like it's hard to say. She's managed to sneak through. So I don't know. I don't know if
Yes.
I have a pick. I feel like my picks have all been picked off so far. So
Same.
like one by one, I'm like, oh.
Yeah, I ask you this going, well, I wanted Emily to win, so
Yeah.
everybody's
Yeah.
equal playing field at this point. So,
Yeah. I'm not really sure. So
yeah.
yeah.
So, Carrie, if people wanted to find you online, where would they go?
Yeah, they can find me on my website. It's Kari Langkamp Coaching. That's KariLangkamp.com, coaching.com, I should say. And then I'm on Instagram and Facebook as well. Not super often, but I am there. Same thing, Kari Langkamp Coaching. And I think there's an underscore in between that on Instagram. So, and if you happen to be in Northwestern Wisconsin, you can read my column. Um, Maybe coming elsewhere soon. So, yes.
Well, I'm going to look at it because I probably will be in northern Wisconsin next summer. So I
Okay.
can probably
Yeah.
find it.
Yes,
Amazing.
it's on my
Um,
website as well, so you can find back issues there. So,
and I'll make it easy on people. It'll be in the show notes. So
okay.
you can find it there. So, Carrie, thank you so much for coming on today. It was
Thank
such a
you.
blast. All
Yes,
right.
thank you.
Until next time.